Hello Americans channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
What happened in this local thrift store last month was crazy, to say the least. A local customer, who frequently visited the shop before this particular day, bought a footstool for $10. A genuine bargain, as he would have put it. But there was something off about this gray piece of furniture. The old grandpa simply didn't know it yet. But then he looked inside and was left speechless. Grandpa buys footstool for $10. He's left speechless when he looks inside. Granda Tim was a well-loved man in his hometown. The 60-year-old retiree wasn't actually a grandpa in the practical sense of the word. But his pleasant demeanor and frequent visits to the local thrift shops made him somewhat of a celebrity in that scene, which earned him that name. Tim was always welcomed with open arms, just like this time. But this visit would turn out quite unexpected. Grandpa Tim entered the largest thrift store in town and was instantly handed a fresh cup of coffee. He greeted the staff and walked around with his beverage, looking for a good bargain. This hunt was the thing he loved most in life. And after just 5 minutes of walking around, he already spotted his first target, a gray leather footstool for only $10. And it was in mint condition. Tim knew his stuff, and he could instantly see that the quality leather on the footstool alone exceeded the asking price. This footstool had to be his, so he asked the staff to put it aside while he continued his thrift hunt. Tim never checked inside the stool since he was already satisfied with its comfort and vintage look. But this would prove to be a big mistake. After not finding any other worthwhile treasure, Tim decided to call it a day. He picked up his beautiful stool and paid the cashier $10 for his bargain. In his mind, Tim had already found a place for it inside his home, a perfect addition for a nice, comfortable reading session in his favorite chair. But there was a surprise waiting for him around the corner. The footstool was placed in its new permanent home and then forgotten about for the rest of the afternoon. It sat in his living room, waiting for that planned reading session later in the evening. But when that moment arrived, something halted Tim's actions. He lifted the stool upward to align it with the chair when he suddenly noticed that the piece of furniture was weirdly heavy. Tim did not notice it in the store, probably because it was early morning and he had not even finished his first coffee of the day. But now that he did notice, curiosity entered his mind. Tim shook the footstool a bit, and a rattling sound instantly emanated from within the leather object. "What is that?" Tim uttered as he slowly lifted the lid. The footstool lid was removed and placed on the ground. And when Tim stared into the hollow space within the footstool, he noticed that multiple non-transparent bags were inside. They were all made out of plastic, each with its own distinct color. What could be inside? Tim had bought this stool for a bargain of $10, but this piece of furniture was not done giving. While scratching the side of his forehead, Tim lifted one of the bags from the stool. They were tucked in tightly, as if someone had placed each item precisely. With the first bag out on the table, Tim turned toward it. The old man felt his hands shake and his heart pulsate as the layers of plastic were folded apart, and that's when he saw it. When Tim looked inside the bag, he was immediately speechless. This wasn't something that happened to him, not ever, but he couldn't deny the thing he saw laid out before him on his kitchen table. The old man had difficulty forming words, and his heart was beating like crazy. "All right, calm down, Tim. You panicking doesn't help anyone," he said to calm himself down. Just to ensure this was real, Tim turned around and removed the other bags from the footstool. In total, there were 18 bags in there, each neatly folded and sealed with tape. They all had different colors, but the contents inside were the same every time. Tim stared at his now full table and held one hand before his open mouth. How is this possible? Tim was overwhelmed by his discovery, to say the least. But it was a find that needed more answers because leaving it in his house did not feel right. He needed a second set of eyes, so while walking backward so the table never left his line of sight, Tim walked toward the cell phone. His fingers trembled, but with some effort, he dialed the right number. A female voice was heard on the other side of the line. "Tim, hey, how nice of you to call." The voice sounded friendly, but Tim had no time for a casual and pleasant conversation. He silenced the woman quickly and told her to stay quiet and listen. "Mary, sis, I found something crazy. It freaks me out, and I need you to come over here and take a look." Tim's sister Mary was taken aback by this remark. She logically asked for a bit more detail about what he found, but Tim said that it was hard to explain. "Just get over here, and you will see for yourself. Come as soon as possible." A bit reluctantly, Mary obliged, stating that she would be there in about 10 minutes. John agreed and ended the call. The old man sat down in his favorite chair, which oversaw both the kitchen table and the front door of his house, and there he waited for his sister to arrive. Mary arrived exactly 10 minutes later, just as she had promised. Tim could hear the car door close, making his heart jump a bit. The unknowing woman slowly walked up to the front door and knocked twice. Mary was curious to find out what her brother had found, but his tone while calling also made the younger sister nervous a bit. Carl spoke from inside the home and said the door was unlocked. It was time to find out what her quirky brother was talking about, so Mary slowly opened the front door, showing her the image of her brother behind it. As the confused woman stepped inside the house, she saw Tim standing in the living room. His body was still shaking, and his eyes were wide and red like he had been crying just recently. Mary was so fixated on her brother's emotional state that she did not even notice what he held the entire time. But when Tim brought his arms forward, there was no unseeing what he carried. As she steps inside the house, Tim is standing in the living room, wide-eyed. Inside Tim's arms was a large stack of cash. And we're not talking about single-dollar bills. These were large amounts of money, all piled up in the trembling arms of her poor brother. "I've never seen this amount of cash before. Where the hell did you get it?" Brother Mary walked forward to take a closer look, and now fully understood why her brother was this anxious. Together, they spread out all the money on the kitchen table after removing the colored plastic bags first. They counted each bill together multiple times, and every time they ended up at the same number. On Tim's kitchen table lay exactly $51,500. The amount was massive, but that was not the part that caused nervousness within Tim's heart. The amount was just the start. And then his sister asked the question that bothered Tim from the start. "Brother, where did all that money come from? Somebody isn't just going to leave behind this amount of cash." Mary was still in disbelief. But that question did hit the right nervous string within Tim. He shivered and shrugged his shoulders at the same time. "I simply bought a footstool from a thrift shop." He continued by explaining that the money was hidden inside his purchase without him knowing it. He simply bought a footstool for $10 at his favorite thrift store and thought that was the end of it. How could I have known this? And I don't think that the store knew it either. After a long pause, the two siblings realized that they couldn't just keep the money. For some people, finding unexpected money is a blessing. They just see a $100 bill on the street and go shopping with it. But Tim and Mary were honest people who felt they didn't earn this money. But the most important reason for not wanting to keep it was a bit more nerve-wracking. They thought no normal person would keep $51,500 in a simple stool and give it away. Something about it felt off, and they did not want to be involved in anything that felt shady. They needed to find out the truth, and maybe then they could give the money back to its original owner. Yes, that feels like the proper thing to do," Tim said while looking at his sister proudly. Both siblings wondered who on earth could have lost this small fortune. The next morning, after a night of restless sleep, Tim and Mary decided to start their search for answers at the thrift shop where Tim had bought the footstool. As soon as they walked in, the familiar scent of old books and wooden furniture greeted them. They were met by the shop's manager, a friendly woman who had always been fond of Tim's frequent visits. When Tim explained the situation, the manager's face tightened with thought. "Oh yes, that stool. It was dropped off about 2 weeks ago by a tall, balding man. He seemed in a hurry to get rid of it, wearing this long green coat. He even told us to sell it to someone deserving." She smiled warmly. "That's why we thought you were perfect, Tim." Despite the detailed description, the manager couldn't recall much more about the man. He seemed eager to leave. Barely saying anything else, Tim and Mary exchanged glances of frustration and curiosity after that explanation. The only lead they had was the vague description of a mysterious man. Thanking the manager, they left the thrift shop, uncertain of their next move. Back at Tim's place, they sat at the kitchen table, the cash still a looming presence in their minds. "So a tall, balding man in a green coat," Mary repeated. That's all we've got. They discussed where else to look, but without more clues, they felt lost. The money sat there, unspent and untouched, like a ticking clock that couldn't be ignored. After an hour of back-and-forth conversation, they decided they couldn't let it rest. "We have to keep digging," Tim insisted. They scoured the internet, local news, and even social media, hoping to find someone who matched the description of the man. However, their search came up empty. Frustration began to creep in, but neither sibling was ready to give up. That evening, just as Mary was about to head home, Tim's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "I know about the footstool and who you are. We need to talk. Call me." The siblings stared at the message in disbelief. Tim's hands trembled as he dialed the number, unsure of who or what was waiting on the other end. After a few rings, a deep, gravelly voice answered. "I assume you found what was hidden in the stool." Tim hesitated before confirming. The voice didn't sound angry, but it was calm and measured. "Come to 45 Evergreen Drive tomorrow at noon. I'll explain everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving Tim and Mary stunned but intrigued. The next day, they drove to the address given on the phone. As they approached Evergreen Drive, the landscape changed. Small suburban houses were replaced by grand estates. The number 45 turned out to be a large, imposing mansion. They parked in the circular driveway and exchanged nervous glances. This was nothing like they had expected. With some hesitation, they rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a tall man with thinning hair behind it. He did not wear a coat, but otherwise he fit the thrift shop's description perfectly. "You're here," he said simply, stepping aside to let them in. His house was vast, decorated with antiques and expensive furniture. They were led into a cozy living room. The man gestured for them to sit down on the plush sofas. "You must be wondering what this is all about," he began. Tim nodded, his curiosity mixing with apprehension. "My name is David, and I've been waiting for someone like you to find that footstool," the man said, leaning back in his chair. "The money. It wasn't left there by accident." "But David, who are you? And why did you already know who I am?" Tim asked curiously. David formed a grin on his face before answering. He explained that Tim had been lied to yesterday. Those staff members at the thrift store, the one Tim trusted so much, were ordered to tell a little white lie. "And they were ordered to tell this lie on my behalf," David said. David was indeed the one who dropped off the footstool at the store, but did not arrive at this particular thrift store by accident. He, in fact, owned that shop and many other businesses in town as well. David was a real estate developer who also owned many small businesses. Most of them were for a wealthy customer base, but one was different. David also wanted a business that would help the local community, one that would support people's humble beginnings, because that was how he started in life. He had to build everything from the ground up. And that's why, not completely to his own surprise, he enjoyed managing the thrift store the most. Giving back to the community gave David great pleasure. Because he loved that place so much and wanted to do more good in the world, he decided to donate. But he would not make the decision on where his donation would go to. He wanted his thrift store employees to choose the lucky person. It needed to be someone who deserved it most, someone with a truly good heart. And apparently they chose you, Tim. David himself put a large amount of money in a piece of furniture and told his staff to only place it in the store when someone worthy would arrive inside the shop. That person needed to buy it and have its life change forever. "So apparently when you entered, my employees deemed you worthy and placed the footstool inside the store for you to find," David explained with a smile. David explained that once his staff chose a worthy owner for that money, they would not simply say where it came from. They were asked to keep it a secret so David could contact the lucky person himself. And now we are here were David's concluding words. Tim and Mary listened with wide eyes and an open mouth. They couldn't believe what had just happened. Tim was grateful but still a bit in shock. But the surprises wouldn't end there. David had one more thing to offer Tim, and this was a big one. The money was a bit of an appetizer, in fact, for the real reason why Tim was brought to his house. David had one more gift to give, but it would only happen if Tim was willing to accept. David leaned forward, his expression serious but warm, as it was from the start. "I know you've earned your retirement, Tim, but I've got an offer for you. You see, I've loved running that thrift store, but I'm too busy to give it the attention it needs. I need someone who understands the people, someone like you, to manage it. What do you say?" Tim blinked in surprise, processing the unexpected offer. "You want me to manage the shop?" he asked, confused. "But I'm just a customer," David smiled, shaking his head. "You're not just a customer, Tim. You're part of the community. The staff loves you, and you've got the heart for it. Plus, you'd keep the money from the Stool, and I will give you every resource to make the shop thrive." Tim stared at the floor, thinking hard. He loved his retirement, the freedom to hunt for bargains whenever he pleased. But managing the shop was an entirely different kind of adventure. "I appreciate the offer, David, but are you sure?" "I'm no businessman," Tim said cautiously. David chuckled. "You don't need to be. Just be yourself, and the rest will fall into place." After a long pause, Tim nodded. "You know what, David? I'm not ready to stop working as long as it's something I enjoy. And this sounds like something I'd love." David's face lit up. "That's great to hear. The shop will be in good hands with you." Tim felt a surge of excitement. This was a chance to give back to the community that had given him so much. The very next week, Tim stepped into his new role. The staff greeted him like an old friend, thrilled that Grandpa Tim was now officially their boss. He brought his warmth and love for people into every aspect of the job, making the shop an even more welcoming place. It became a hub for the town, where folks came not just to shop but also to connect. Under Tim's management, the thrift store flourished. Donations increased, and so did the foot traffic. People from all walks of life came in, drawn by the sense of community that Tim fostered. He ensured no one left the shop without a smile, whether they found a great deal or just came in for a chat. The shop wasn't just a business but a lifeline for the town. David, now free from the store's day-to-day operations, used his time to start more projects that helped the community. He opened new businesses, each one aimed at giving back, just like the thrift shop. With Tim running the store, David knew he could trust that part of his legacy to someone who truly cared about people, allowing him to focus on doing even more good. For Tim, the job became a new passion. He still found time to hunt for bargains, of course, but now he did it with a greater purpose in mind. He knew that every treasure he found could bring joy to someone else in his shop. And every day, he went home with the satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference in someone's life. The store continued to thrive, and Tim became even more beloved in the community. Grandpa Tim was now a fixture of the town, someone everyone knew they could turn to for help, a kind word, or just a friendly face. And as the years went by, he never regretted his decision to come out of retirement for this special role. All of this was possible because of a $10 footstool, a man who believed in doing good, and a community that came together under the guidance of Grandpa Tim. And this was just how it all was supposed to be. David started out from humble beginnings, and whatever happened after he thought up his plan needed to have the same origin. Well, I believe he succeeded.